I'm gonna let Jennifer introduce herself, but Say Women are basically an amazing charity doing some work offering safe, semi-supported accommodation and emotional support for young women aged 16 to 25 who are survivors of sexual abuse and who are homeless or threatened with homelessness. So before I pass over to Jennifer, I just thought I'd kind of explain how the hour's going to look. I'll let Jennifer introduce herself, and then she's got a presentation for us about the work that they're doing at Say Women. I thought then we could have kind of a brief question and answers, just anything that you've kind of particularly picked up from the presentation that you might want to ask Jennifer. We then thought we would go out into breakout rooms to have a bit of a discussion. We've got some questions for you to discuss, and then we'll come back at the end just for a bit of kind of final feedback and round off the session. So Jennifer, that's all I have to say. I'm going to pass over to you, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Cheers, Jenny. That was fabulous. So if we could share the slides and I'll take it away, that's fab. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's session. I'm going to try and speak as concisely as possible about women and homelessness for the next 15-20 minutes. It's a huge subject and one that we're very passionate about at Say Women, so I'll do my best to get us through this content in a timely manner. I'm not yet seeing the slides. That's if anybody else is seeing them.
No, we haven't got them on our screen yet.
Just a wee second, folks. There we go. Thank you so much. So yes, I am Jen. I'm from Say Women. Jenny introduced us perfectly. We do support homeless, sexually abused young women. I want to tell you a bit more about that. Next slide, please. Yes, so why child sexual abuse and homelessness I felt was a good place to start. So Say Women was established 31 years ago in 1991 on the back of a CHAR housing report which found that 4 in 10 young women who were homeless had become so due to sexual abuse. We do expect that to be quite a sizable underestimation given the sort of limitations and data capture for survivors of childhood sexual abuse and homelessness, and we'll look a wee bit more about the issues with capture and homelessness in a few short slides. But the research recognised the really complex sort of intersecting needs of young women in this position and the high risk of ongoing targeting from perpetrators due to their vulnerable circumstance. And unfortunately, to our knowledge, we are still the only organisation in Western Europe, in fact, that looks at that crossover of sexual violence, sexual abuse and homelessness. But we'd like to have many more services like that. And we'll tell you why we feel that's necessary in the next few slides. So next slide, please. Yeah, so if you just keep clicking until we see national training at the bottom. Thank you. Perfect. So just a wee bit more about who we are. Say Women have a semi-supported accommodation service for up to 8 young women. And in the accommodation service, they'll get a short Scottish secured tenancy for up to 1.5 years, and it's kind of a trial run with emotional and practical support, supporting them through trauma recovery and into independent living. But we do have a service in the city centre that catches a much wider cohort of young women who maybe have their own tenancy and don't need that support, where they can come and get one-to-one emotional and practical support. We've got a crisis response service, so the service essentially is trying to kind of avoid people feeling like they are waiting endlessly. If young women are referred to us and they feel that they're in crisis, we can offer them up to 12 sessions, no longer than 2 weeks after the referral, and this is to try and support them to establish a sense of safety before they go on the waiting list to get the one-to-one emotional and practical support. And during that time as well, they can still join our group work programme. So we're trying to sort of encapsulate a wraparound service from the first moment that young women are referred. We have a tenancy sustainment service addressing the complex needs of survivors who are trying to sustain a tenancy and live independently whilst coping with the impacts of surviving abuse in childhood, sexual violence. We have a substance abuse support service for our young women who may use substances to cope. We have Community Connector, which is my second role at Stay Women, supporting young women at the more at the end of their time with us to re-engage with the wider community. We're very aware that trauma never really occurs in isolation. There's always an external factor, event or person, and so it's really important to reconnect in the social. We have a wide range of group work, and we've got a national training service. So if anybody's watching today and you're thinking, what's that about? If you head on any of our socials or head on our website, there's a bit more info. But I'll move on now and dive into the subject. Next slide, please. So yeah, we begin, oh, sorry, just one slide back, please. Thank you. We begin by just looking at why is homelessness a gendered issue. So just briefly to say that while people experiencing homelessness will share many common experiences, homelessness is inherently gendered and women have very distinct experiences when they're homeless. A clear example of that is in 2002 in Scotland, domestic abuse is still identified as the main cause of women's homelessness. Women are often forced to leave their home and then move multiple times, sometimes trying to secure their own safety and sometimes even their children's safety. Sadly, Shelter Scotland expect over 8,500 children will wake up homeless on Christmas this year, which is really tough. And we know that 95% of single parent families are headed by women. So we're starting to see lots of intersectionality already. Homelessness was traditionally viewed as a sort of male-dominated problem. And over the last few years, several policy initiatives have been sort of put in place to try and address, prevent and end like rough sleeping and homelessness, but women have been quite largely invisible in these developments. Moreover, there is evidence that indicates that though men are overrepresented in homeless statistics, women's homelessness is more likely to be hidden and therefore overlooked. So we do have a phenomenon of hidden homelessness. That we have visible homelessness, of course, being street homeless or being in hostels or declaring yourself homeless at a local authority. But much of the homeless population don't actually fall into this category at all. And they don't really then show up on the official figures about homelessness. So there was a study in 2013 that drew on all the available survey data and used statistical estimates to determine that approximately 43% of the homeless population are actually hidden homeless. Evidence supports that women are actually more likely to conceal their homelessness and therefore be overlooked in the statistics. Next slide, please. So a quote from a study in 2001 by Edgar and Doherty says the ability of women to hide their homelessness within the supportive confines of their social network not only demonstrates their effective coping strategies, but importantly also has the potential effect of disguising the full extent of the problem from the public gaze and hence as a welfare issue. So there are many reasons why a woman might be more likely to take measures to conceal their homelessness. And many of the young women that have used our service over the years would sort of ascribe to that and say that that's the sort of methods that they use. So some reasons might include women may be more likely to have like a support network or family and friends than single men. A big part might be that women fear that declaring themselves homeless may result in the removal of their children, and women are far more likely to head homeless families. There is awareness heightened awareness of the risk of sexual assault and further violence if street homeless or even placed in homeless hostels that are not gender sensitive or don't have any female provision and can be quite male dominated. And there is the wider sort of societal expectations of women, the gender roles and the stereotypes that attach a stigma towards homeless women. Being homeless might be seen sometimes unmaternal or maybe anti-feminine. So the consequences of the male-focused models of homeless provision has resulted in services displaying low levels of gender sensitivity, which can really increase the barriers to accessing these for women. The Simon community, actually, I got a nice wee quote from them. Female-oriented services were found to prioritise the needs of mothers and women fleeing domestic violence, a focus which has served to reinforce a distinction between homeless services and specialised services such as refugees. So this forces single women to access generalist services that are primarily male-dominated, and that the consequences that women will avoid mainstream homeless services. So it's really great that we've got a relatively good amount of domestic abuse services and provision, and that will capture quite a lot of gender-based violence, coercive control and emotional and physical. But there are other types of gender-based violence that aren't captured with that. So women, for example, fleeing exploitation, trafficking, child sexual abuse, sexual violence in general. They aren't as much as well captured and supported with these provisions. Next slide, please. So this is a really great infographic again from the Simon community from 2015, which kind of highlights some of the places or the situations which women's hidden homelessness might look like. So we can have street homelessness, people who disguise the situation to avoid violence and abuse. We might have couch surfing, that's very common, couch surfing, staying with friends and acquaintances, which can surmount to living in unsuitable.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, okay. Did you order something?
Sorry about that, folks. Couch surfing can surmount to living in sort of dangerous and overcrowded accommodations. I was hosting a session recently, and an ex-service user who's on our advisory board spoke of her experience where, as a young woman, she had tried to present as homeless and very young, around the 16, 17 mark, and was told that the only place that they could put her was in Aberdeen, and she was from Glasgow. So that's complete isolation, complete removal of the support network. So she then turned to the couch surfing model and was never then formally recognised as homeless again, whilst being homeless for over 2 years. And we have like prisons, psychiatric wards, which we might consider enforced respite facilities such as that. They might have nowhere to go. Then looking at intimate relationships becoming practical means to an end, heightening that opportunity for perpetrators to exploit vulnerable women, essentially. So helpful infographic, but I'll move on due to time restrictions. Next slide, please. So we'll talk a wee bit more about why do women experience homelessness and housing instability, and if we're building a gendered understanding of homelessness, how women experience homelessness, we need to acknowledge the roots into homelessness and the things that can maintain the cycles of women's homelessness. So causing and contributing factors. A huge one is economic disadvantage. Despite equal pay, we still have a wide gender pay gap of equal pay being a legal requirement. We still have this wide gender pay gap, 17.3%. Women are overrepresented in lower paid sectors, and when they're in higher paid sectors, they tend to be in lower paid roles. House of Commons paper in 2020 published an interesting stat that the pay gap between mothers and fathers is around 10%, before the birth of the first child and widens to a gap of around 30% by the time that child is 13. Speaking to the sort of gendered role of the woman being the natural carer, reducing her hours, making more space to be the carer in the familial household, which will over time impact on her financial and economic resource and then abilities to support herself. And the systemic sort of economic inequalities within gender in that women are disproportionately dependent on the social housing sector and housing benefits. They are more likely to pay a higher portion of their income to rent. They are less likely to be able to access adequate standards of housing, more likely to be in overcrowded housing, more vulnerable to housing insecurity overall. And as I said, women are significantly more likely to head homeless families. The pandemic, COVID-19, and the austerity politics that we've been living in for the past 12 years, 13 years, has had a devastating impact on women. The benefit cap affects single-parent households, which are 95% women. The two-child limit, the indefensible rape clause, the freezing of child benefit, the single household payment of universal credit, tending to go into the head of the house. The partner that has more power is more likely to get the universal credit. All of these factors will contribute to women being able to have financial independence and financial security, which are huge drivers for housing insecurity and homelessness. These inequalities have been deeply exacerbated by the unequal impact of the pandemic, and disabled women, Black and minority ethnic women, women with caring roles, younger women and older women have been affected by the pandemic. Moving on then quickly to touch on gender-based violence, COVID-19 highlighted a shadow pandemic of violence against women, and has shown that all types of violence against women, particularly domestic abuse, intensified. As a feminist organisation, we understand that men's violence against women is a pandemic in its own right, and it's been there for a long time. But the restrictions on freedoms intensified it significantly. Helplines where they seem like a 300% increase in usage and stuff. So all these intersectional issues really come together and drive and can be drivers for women's homelessness. Violence is endemic in women's homelessness. It's understood to be both a cause of homelessness and as well as a risk that comes as a result of homelessness. And it can perpetuate women's homelessness. In 2022, as we sit here now, 1 in 3 women will experience gender-based violence in a lifetime, and 1 in 8 women will experience sexual violence in a lifetime. And the age demographic that a woman is most likely to experience sexual violence is between 16 and 25. So it's starting really young, and the consequences of that have an impact for a woman's ability to access wider life opportunities and their ability to cope and sustain a tenancy. Finally, I'm just going to speak to the impact of childhood trauma and sexual abuse. It can have really adverse impacts on a woman's sense of self-worth, her confidence, affecting her engagement, her employment, and her sense of self-efficacy. Unfortunately, experiencing abuses are linked to a higher risk of further victimisation and exploitation. So I'll just finish up on the next slide. We'll take some questions before the discussion points. What I'm speaking to here, folks, is this idea of cyclic abuse and cyclic homelessness. And we see the overlap quite clearly on the slide here, where I'm experiencing a life cycle of violence and abuse, a life cycle, particularly with men's violence against women, that is significantly statistically likely to start when you're at a younger age, 16 to 25. Will leave you with low self-esteem, a depletion of your health, PTSD, the utilisation of harmful coping strategies to get by, which can also impact your finances, your mental health, your physical health. Your social network can get exhausted. You can become really estranged from house culture, permanence, sense of your own identity and where you call home. And that can really impact things like homelessness. When someone has become homeless, it can be very difficult to regain stability and security. For women who've experienced of abuse, the life cycle of violence and the gendered experiences of homelessness can further perpetuate the situation. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour on our thoughts around women and homelessness and the sort of unique experiences that they're having. Well, not unique stories, but gender-wise. So I'm going to open it up to any questions now.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, and anyone want to raise their hand? Write anything in the chat for Jennifer before we go into breakout rooms.
Island.
I might just, because there's always someone who wants to ask questions, so I'll ask one and then maybe other people will ask something. So one of the things that kind of leaped out at me, so sorry, I'm Oliver, I work for Platform, which is a mental health charity, and one of the things we're really keen on doing is breaking the system that has people going in and out of kind of mental health systems, which can be particularly for women around things like diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, can be really dehumanizing and quite destructive actually as well. And what's really interesting is seeing the connection that you've made in that cycle kind of with women kind of leaving and psychiatric wards. I'm just wondering how much of that has been, obviously it's a key issue, but wondering what am I trying to say? Sorry, I should have thought about this. I was just so desperate to be like, oh, let's get someone asking you a question. Do you find that as an organisation you do a lot of unpicking around psychiatric wards and mental health with the women that you support? And if you have, do you have any advice for us about how we could do things differently, if that makes sense?
Such a great question, such a huge and timely question, I think, as well. Unfortunately, yeah, we do have to do a wee bit of unpicking around mental health and diagnoses. But there's two sides to that coin, and one side is women can be diagnosed and then medicated, and they feel that they don't get a chance to really address the core root of the problem. They have to find us by themselves. You know, it's almost a plaster over the issue, and then that sort of nudge to go out into the world, which doesn't quite work with complex trauma. But the other side of the coin is I suppose the psychiatric services when women are in crisis can be absolutely invaluable. So I think to unpick it or to try and navigate it, what we do is we really just try and do a lot of holistic work, giving the young women information, and it's very critical that we don't completely undermine the medical model, because there is value in it, but definitely promoting sort of more holistic avenues to recovery. That seems like a bit of a politician's answer to that question. I hope that's all right.
We've got a hand up from Jackie Carpenter.
Yeah.
Oh, you're still on mute, Jackie.
Sorry, I thought I'd clicked on it. So we provide supported accommodation and a specialist service for people who are facing multiple exclusions from housing and rough sleeping, and just generally at the kind of most sort of sharpest end of the issues you're describing. And obviously a lot of them are male, but the female people who come through our doors are actually harder to help. And I think one of the main reasons is about relationships, because I see a lot of women who they either start out feeling they can't manage without a relationship, or they are made to feel that they can't manage without a relationship, the kind of coercive control issues. And I'd be really interested if anybody's got anything that has been successful in kind of breaking that cycle, because often women, I'm sure everybody knows, you go from one abusive relationship, it finally gets bad enough, they break free of that, or they end up in hospital or prison, and then they come out and start the same kind of thing all over again. And it's really frustrating because as an outsider you can see what's going on, but I can't seem to be able to make people aware of what's going on themselves. So I'd be really interested to know if anybody's got anything that's successful they can share on how we can do better on that front.
Just to quickly speak to that myself, is a huge issue for us at Women as well, because it's a very natural and normal thing, isn't it, to want to have connection with a significant other in your life, and intimate relationships are highly romanticised, and it's understandable as well for our cohort 16 to 25. They're very keen to have important connections. All we do it's their choice, we support their choice no matter what, but we just look at the healthy relationships education and the boundaries education and try and really work on their sense of self, because they're more likely to stand up for themselves and put those healthy boundaries in place when they've done some sort of self work. But it's a difficult one. Any other sort of thoughts on that? Because I certainly am no expert or the absolute out of knowledge.
Maybe that's something we could take into the breakout room if people are particularly interested about picking up on that comment, Jackie. That'd be great. Kylie, have you got a question for Jennifer?
Hello, it's sort of a question and sort of a bit of information. I'm on the Isle of Wight, so I'm like a little island a million miles away from you, Jennifer, which is as far away as possible we can get. We came across a lot. We've recently recommissioned all of our services on the island, and single people who go into the services. We came across a lot of relationships that were being formed in our hostels, and women were experiencing a lot of negative relationships. And because of that, we looked at developing. Developed a small bed for small house of 4 beds for just women only, all accommodations, to be able to live knowing that they're surrounded by females and they're getting the support that they need. And that's really helped, because a lot of people were being placed in hostels that were, all the other hostels on the island are mixed, and they were experiencing domestic abuse, and there were people in there that they've had unhealthy relationships with. So moving forward, that's been a really positive thing that we've tried over here. Just one more thing as well. There was a Concord Act that was signed across the south of England to say that everybody would work in a trauma-informed way and would recognise adverse childhood experiences early on and work to prevent them, and be trauma-informed rather than people who have gone through these sort of situations. It could be the trauma they've experienced and look at ways to deal with the trauma rather than sticking I'm not dissing mental health labelling or anything, but do you see what I mean? And it's working better to help people rather than saying, oh, it's actually this mental health issue. Well, actually, it's not, it's the trauma they've experienced, and this is how we're going to help them overcome the trauma, rather than giving them an antidepressant or something and try and fix it that way. So that was I don't even know if that was a question, but that was my ramble.
That was great, thank you.
Let's bring Jennifer in, and then there's a question on the chat, and then we'll go into our breakout rooms.
Hi Jennifer, I'm much closer to you than other people, so I'm from Edinburgh. And I support mothers who are single parents who are in temporary accommodation with children under 5, and I just wanted to ask if you are hopeful of the new hopefully the new legislation that might be coming in next year about perpetrators being the ones to be made to leave the tenancy, and police being given more power and social landlords being given more power to change that tenancy, so that the idea is that women are less likely to become homeless because they can stay in their tenancy, and the police and social landlords will have more power to do that. Are you hopeful? I'm not sure if I am, or we'll have to see, but I think it is, you know, I think it's forefront thinking in the way in helping women who experience homelessness and sort of tackling that gendered issue.
Totally. Thank you for bringing that to the fore. That's a huge one. We want to be hopeful. It's such a huge move in the right direction, but without being too cynical, there's definitely been a lot of reports of, you know, since the pandemic and the current economic crisis that we're in, that responses to social landlords towards women and single parent families haven't been great. Again, with police giving them more power is fantastic, but we do have major issues with sexism in these institutions, and it's just making sure that these powers are used correctly. So yeah, we remain hopeful. We're also losing the third verdict in Scotland soon as well, in terms of convictions, which will have a knock-on effect on the culture. So yes, I'm like yourself, Jennifer, I'm remaining hopeful, but I think the proof will be in the pudding on that one. Yeah,
that phrase was just on the tip of my tongue to say as well. Yeah, and actually putting that into practice might be a bit more difficult than putting it on paper.
Yeah, unfortunately there's lots of research around even police who've been specially trained in gender-based violence being very untrauma informed, unperson centred and sensitive in their approach, really, which again is speaking to that underlying sort of systemic sexism that we're still really trying to shake out the rug.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Cheers.
Jen, we've got one question in the chat from Alex saying they're interested in ways you and others have been able to help women break the link between those cycles of homelessness and cycles of abuse you described.
Lovely, great question. We have been a trauma-informed organisation since we began, and essentially what we do is we work to all the trauma-informed principles. What we first do is help the young women establish safety. Then we go through a collaborative process where they can develop trusting relationships within the SAY community. They have a chance to tell their story, be validated and believed, and gain more perspective, gain a community within SAY and supporting them to then have a successful move on. So I suppose I'm off in a ramble, but we just work in a trauma-informed way. We allow the young women to engage when they want to engage and disengage when they have to. We allow them to be the directors of their support. We offer them everything that we've got, and they get to choose. They shape our training. They shape. They do the monitoring and evaluation of all the tools that we use. You know, they're so embedded, and essentially what that does is it empowers an individual. It increases your self-efficacy, your sense of identity, so that when move on does take place, they are just significantly more likely to be able to hold their tenancy down. And we've got that tenancy sustainment service alongside that, advocating for them. Just essentially, we've been trying to be a wraparound support for so long, and just showing that awareness and supporting those enhanced needs essentially breaks that cycle. Sometimes, most of the time, not always, but most of the time.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Jennifer, and thank you for the great presentation and answering all of our questions. We're now going to go into some breakout rooms. There were a couple of questions, Jen, we had. I've put them into the chat. Are we happy with the two that we discussed?
Yeah, they were.
I sent over, okay.
Oh, you're on mute, Jenny. I'm just going to read the chat now, folks.
How that happened. Yep, two questions are now in the chat. Each of the breakout rooms will have a facilitator to just make sure that the conversation stays on track, but it doesn't really matter if it doesn't. what should we say? Come back at 10 to, yeah, or even 5 to, so that we can have 15 minutes in the breakout rooms, just focus on quick fire feedback before we end the session. So whoever behind the scenes is putting together the breakout rooms, I think we're good to go. Okay, hopefully everybody's come back from their big breakout rooms and managed to have a bit of conversation to kind of continue on from Jen's presentation. I'm going, well, does anybody want to, I'm going to ask the facilitators to just kind of give a really brief kind of feedback on what the room was talking about, so to hopefully allow us to take a few things away with us from this session. So Jennifer, go on, seeing as you're there.
Gosh, I totally forgot to take notes because I was just absolutely involved in the chat, but we spoke about a need for individuality across all services. So more to the second question, it's about listening to people as individuals and their needs. How can we better support women experiencing homelessness? Is just to listen to them, to hold space, to go at their pace, to offer them choice, all these sorts of key things. Trauma-informed practice, really. That way.
Yeah, that's really good. Ollie, because I can see you up the top there.
I should have hit my camera. Yeah, very similar. Some really good practical things, which I always love when people are doing practical things. So, some people have redesigned, assessment forms, so that they're much more kind of caring and aware of what could potentially be quite triggering in some of the questions. Again, that treating people as people thing coming through a lot. Some conversations very briefly about kind of if your role is in street outreach, for example, and there's fewer women, how that kind of works, but about therefore making sure that the conversations you have with people are on their terms. So people saying how they would offer phone conversations rather than face-to-face, or vice versa, depending what people felt most comfortable with. And one of those things that when someone says it, it feels incredibly obvious, but wasn't until they said it out loud, which was I think it was West London Mission who are using kind of hotels for up to 3 months, and the different kind of sorry, my brain's slowly fading, about using Airbnbs, for example. Like a lot of women would prefer to have and share Airbnbs with families, whereas a lot of single homeless men would prefer, or not prefer, but would be happy to kind of go almost anywhere. So for me, there's a lot about, again, that awareness of power, awareness of trauma, and just having that flowing through everything. So yeah, but brilliant examples from people. I loved it. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Ashley. Joanna, do you want to come in there?
Sure. Our group really looked at 3 aspects to the answers. So we looked at the system level and what might be needed within systems in order to respond in a way that was more of a long-term ending of a cycle for women. So things around joining of statutory services with charities, and that there are gaps, and often women will fall through those gaps because of the lack of joined up work, and that sense of provisions that don't serve women as individuals and just serve, a one size fits all, a challenge that we should be doing to the systems. But there's also a sense of infiltrating those systems by having allies within statutory services that understand them more trauma-informed way and having them involved in some of the delivery. We also talked about women's voices and how women's voices and their experiences should be kind of embedded into the tapestry of service delivery. On an individual level, we talked about women being able to build relationships and being held and having a space to tell their story without there being a hidden agenda. And for women to feel more involved, and that goes back into women's voices being part of what service delivery should look like. I think that's everything, but anyone from my group, feel free to jump in.
I think that's great. I'm amazed at how much everybody covered in such a short period of time. That's some really, really great things coming out. Our group kind of very, very similar things coming through. We talked about kind of the fact that there are bespoke services out there for women, but it's more that the kind of attention needs to be focused on the mainstream services who are lacking the information about kind of women's needs, and that more training is needed in general around kind of the needs of women. And we also spoke about kind of that point that Jackie brought in about building trust and relationships and seeing people as a whole person and bringing our whole selves to build these relationships with the people that we're supporting. So yeah, some really great things kind of coming out of those discussions. We've got 4 minutes left. I think that means that we can kind of round off for today. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us. Thank you so much to Jen from Say Women for her presentation. Hopefully Jen will be able to make the slides available to everyone. Is that possible?
I think I thought I was going to have a sort of closing off slide, so I prepared a wee slide. It's fine, we've run out of time and we had
we've got 3 minutes. Do you want to?
If that's all right, but I'll make the slides aware. And I've noticed 2 people in the chat are asking about hidden homelessness, so I'll not only send the slides, but I'll send my sources so that you guys can explore that as well. All right,
that would be great. Do you want to do a final remark?
Just to say that there is a wealth of legislation that's looking at ending homelessness together, equally safe, housing first. Everybody's making moves in the right direction. There is awareness that we need gendered policy, and you'll see that all in the last slide. Again, I'll leave my sources for further research, but we are making strides. Have hope, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Jen. So that's us done for today. Thank you for joining us. We've got another conversation that challenges on the 7th of December, where we'll be welcoming Christian Seelossen, who's Director of Global Innovation for Impact Lab at Stanford University. So come along if that interests you, and otherwise we'll hopefully see some of you at other events throughout the rest of the year and into next year. Thanks, everyone.